Greetings. Do we know how many people we're expecting?
We are expecting about 20 registered, but with the advent of online and recording, you never know with folks' schedule if
Yeah.
they are going to decide to just watch the recording later or.
Okay. Well, for the sake of time, let's go ahead and get started and we'll let people trickle in as they will. My name is Jade Piros de Carvalho with Kansas Office of Broadband Development. Just wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to tune in today to learn more about the challenge process, which is something we're doing a little bit differently than we've done in past programs and something that local governments are going to have a much stronger role in than in past broadband programs. Before we get started, I thought it might be good to do a few introductions for those of you who haven't met us. As I mentioned, my name is Jade, also from the KOBD team. We have our broadband program manager, Josh Edgar. Do you want to wave, Josh? Our GIS wizard, Stephen Shelton. Broadband infrastructure program manager, Casey Russell. Partnerships coordinator, Shelley Pash. Outreach manager, Morgan Barnes, who most of you know. Is there anybody else from the KOBD staff on?
Casey?
No? Okay, well, I think we also have a few of our consultant partners. So Deb and Bub, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Deb Pugley. I'm with Celerity. We're supporting KOBD on their BEAD and digital equity plans. And from our team, we have Bud Ratliff, who's our program manager, Bob Stewart, who is leading our BEAD effort, Rachel Carvalho, who just is brand new to our team and is supporting both sides of the house as well. And I'm just looking to see if we have anyone else on the line. I don't think so. I think that's it, Jade, for us.
Okay, well, thank you. Also, I think joining us is Melinda Stanley, the Federal Program Officer from NTIA. Melinda, are you on the call?
Hello,
Great.
yes, I am. Good
Many of
afternoon,
you,
everyone.
and many of you probably know Melinda, and she'll be available to answer additional questions that might come up that we can't answer. So with that, I am going to kick it off to my team to go over the agenda.
Oh, we're muted. There we go. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Today we're going to talk about the challenge requirement basics. We're going to talk about examples of allowable challenges and pre-challenge process modification proposals. And then what? Also some speed tests, and our favorite will be question and answer, because we know there is a lot of information coming at you over the next several months, and we just really appreciate your time. So we want to dive into your questions and make sure we support you as we move this process forward. So with that agenda, we're going to talk about process, and I'm going to pass it to our KOBD Broadband Program Manager, Josh.
Yeah, great, thank you. So just to start over, with an overview of the process. So why challenge? So the idea is that we need to create an accurate list of broadband serviceable locations and community anchor institutions that we can rely on as we move into the BEAD process. We need to know what can and cannot be built to, what is served and unserved. And so that is the process. That's the point of the process. Who can challenge? This is open to a wide variety of actors. We have tribes, local governments, not-for-profits, and also broadband service providers. You will see the term eligible entities thrown around probably in the rest of this PowerPoint and throughout the challenge process. And that is, that is the collectively, again, the tribes, local governments, not-for-profits, and broadband service providers. So just make sure that that terminology is defined. All right, next slide, please. All right, so I'm going over just the Kansas challenge process overview. So what is a challenge? It is essentially submitting evidence stating that a location should or should not be listed as eligible for BEAD funding. So again, like I said earlier, it is your opportunity to help us determine which locations are eligible to ultimately get funding. And ultimately, challenge is your way of saying that this area, or this particular location, is, while some sources of data may say it's served, it's your opportunity to prove to us that it is actually not served. If you want more specifics, look into requirement 7 in the BEAD initial proposal volume 1, which is on our website. So when can a challenge occur? There's a BEAD is kind of a complicated process, but to put it very succinctly, once we have approval from the NTIA, the overarching federal body overseeing the BEAD allocation, once we have approval of our volume 1 and our volume 2 is submitted, and locations are ultimately are also deduplicated. So we're looking at probably late November and early December, depending on kind of again the approval process and ultimately how fast those documents are reviewed. And just to make sure, so that word deduplication is not one that is commonly defined. We had some confusion with it initially, and so deduplication. While we'll talk about it later, is just the essentially removing locations that are already covered by different federal grants, which is something that's not allowed. Or I should say, the funding of already funded areas that have been funded through federal grants is not allowed under BEAD. And so that's kind of what that process will look like. But again, we'll talk about that later. So I think I can now kick it back over to Celerity to talk about the timeline real quick.
That sounds good. So, have you got it, Bob? Well, the timeline is going to what's already underway, where we're preparing for the challenge process by putting out the guidance and working towards making sure that the tool set is ready. They're going to be then in the December timeframe. That's when the actual challenge process will begin. The challenge process will then end in the February timeframe, and then updates will be published in the February and March timeframe. So that's a high-level overview. Bob or Deb, do you want to talk about more of the detail associated there?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So if we can just go back to that. So in the first 30 days that the challenge portal is open, is when any one of the eligible entities that Josh described can actually file a challenge. We'll have a portal that you could go into, you pre-register, identify yourself as who you represent, and we declare you an eligible entity. And then you can actually file a challenge with a list of documentation that we'll also provide you to tell you what you need to have depending on the challenges, and we'll go through those in a minute. And then once those are filed, they actually turn into what is called a rebuttal, and that is where the person you challenged, meaning the company you challenged that owns the location that you're looking at, they have a chance to respond. They have 14 days to respond. And then once they respond with their evidence, then KOBD receives it all and looks at it to say, okay, are we going to sustain that challenge, or are we going to decline the challenge and the rebuttal? And then at the end of the challenge period, KOBD, and when they finish rebuttals, then they take all of their decisions, summarize them, and present them to the NTIA for approval before they share them. So challenge, rebuttal, adjudication, NTIA review. And then once that is reviewed and completed, then KOBD will be waiting to submit all of their final paperwork and also get back all their final approvals. And then after that, sometime hopefully by the end of first quarter, we'll see the BEAD subgrantee process begin. And I think we probably have Bob here if you want to move on, but if not, I'll go ahead.
No, I'm here, Deb. Sorry.
Hey, no worries. Go ahead. I've already covered this great. This really, except you just want to talk about the data that's required as evidence.
So there's 4 phases to the process. First phase is KOBD publishing a list on their website of all the eligible locations that can be challenged through the challenge portal. There's several things we do to that data. So if other grant programs have funded the area for qualified broadband service, which is 100 over 20 megabits, those areas are not eligible for BEAD funding. If you have old, I'm just going to say it, telco DSL, because I'm an old telco guy, all of those locations are reclassified as underserved, meaning they're eligible for BEAD funding. And then we'll also be conducting speed tests over on a certain criteria that if the speed that is measured at that business, home, community anchor institution is less than 100 over 20 megabits, and the location is showed by served on the map, we will be changing those to being underserved or underserved based on the results of the speed test. Then all of those locations get published for challenge comment. Go ahead and flip. I think, Bud, are you flipping?
Morgan's
Okay.
driving this time.
Oh,
Yeah.
Morgan's driving? Okay, thank you,
Yeah.
Morgan. So once that list is published, and there'll be a lot of information included in that list, the process will be open for 30 days. What does that mean? It means that if you're a local government, if you're a tribe, if you're an ISP, you can come in and say, I don't agree that this address is served. They can't get service. And so that's what you're challenging the status of the location, whether it's served with 100 over 20 or better, or whether it's 25.3 to 120, or whether they can't even get 25.3. So that's what you're challenging availability, you're challenging latency, you're challenging speeds that are on in these locations within the organizations that the non-for-profits represent, as well as the geographic areas that are your constituents in county, city, local government. The challenges will be sent to the provider that's being challenged. On this morning call, I picked on AT&T pretty badly, and we had a good laugh. So if you say, hey, AT&T says they offer 100 over 20 megabit, but no one can get it, when you put that in, that challenge is going to be sent to AT&T to say, AT&T, what do you think about this? Your evidence has to be in there. So there's various types of evidence. We'll go over a little bit of that later. Then AT&T will have 14 days to provide their evidence on why they think the challenger was right, wrong, or indifferent. They may not respond. If so, the challenge is sustained, and the classification of that address would potentially change from being served to being underserved and hence eligible for BEAD funding. Click the page. Morgan, thank you. So the rebuttal challenge makes the location disputed. So if AT&T responds to my challenge in, I always pick on Cheyenne County, Kansas, they respond and say, oh, no. We serve that area, and here's our evidence that we serve that area. That challenge is now thrown into disputed phase between the two parties, the challenger and the rebutter. If the rebutter doesn't respond within the specified 14 days that was in our plan, the challenger wins. So In this case, we would change the classification of that address from served to underserved, hence qualified for BEAD funding and infrastructure to serve that location. And the provider can agree. They can come back and say, yeah, I'm not serving that area. And we call that sustained. So, it's basically each party has the ability to put together their best, if you will, civil case lawsuit. And then this is the rebuttal phase where the state has provided their evidence as the prosecutor, and now the defendant is providing their evidence. Go ahead and flip, sir. Ma'am, I'm so sorry. It's been a very long day. I'm sorry, folks. So now KOBD is going to sit down with the challenger its evidence and the rebutter's evidence, and they're going to make a decision. They're going to either sustain the disputed locations or reject the dispute. And that's going to be based on the quality of the evidence that's provided by each party, as well as the quantity of evidence that's provided by each party, and how objective that evidence is. It'll be a very pretty scientific process. It will not be open to great subjective judgment. And then when they're all done with that, they're going to post that list that has now changed from the first list that went into the challenge process. They're going to post that list and say, these are the locations that we will be bidding out for infrastructure grants sometime in 2024. Next slide, ma'am. So the challenge process is very data driven. And so as such, you get to see data. So if you look on the left-hand side of that screen, you'll see a whole bunch of challenge types: availability, speed, latency, data caps, so on and so forth. As well as the bottom, is this location a community anchor institution? That meaning it's not classified today to get 1 gig symmetrical, or this location that we've identified as a community anchor institution really doesn't exist anymore. They went out of business or whatnot. So there's codes, 1-digit alphanumeric codes like ASLDT, very scientific, that you would put into your challenge, that your challenge in the availability of broadband at this address could be a unit of a multi-dwelling unit. I am in an apartment. I am in a suite in a strip mall or in an office building. I can't get broadband. That's an availability challenge. Speed. The speed I'm getting based on the speed test I took, I'm not getting that speed. And there's very specific requirements for that. All of these things are different codes, and these are all of them that you'll be able to challenge. I'm a ISP. I'm offering service in your area, but I don't want any residential customers. All I want are business customers. That would be a business service only challenge. Data caps. Yeah, I believe the data cap is 6 gig. Oh no, 60 gig. So if my satellite provider, my fixed wireless, or my terrestrial provider is capping the amount of data I use, and they're going to slow me down or charge me more money, that's a challenge. So these are all the different codes. There's specific evidence that has been suggested by the NTIA. And so all of that information, detailed information, is posted on the KOBD website.
Hey, Bob, we should also add that when you come into the challenge portal, those challenge types will be there where you can see them with a short explanation as well. So
Yep.
You don't have to be well schooled in them. You just have to be prepared with your evidence that it asks for.
Yep. Thank you, Deb. Appreciate that. Any questions on this? This is kind of the guts of, how do I file to renew my driver's license? This is the kind of information that's needed. Basically, the address challenged we have to be able to specifically identify that. And when you put in your address or click on the map to find your house or your business or your community anchor institution, that address, that is what's going to be the unique identifier as we go through this entire process. So address validation, all those things that you would normally do when you're filling out an online form will be present within the portal. Any questions? All right. Do you have anything in the chat, Morgan? Okay. Let's do the next slide. Thank you. Speed tests. This is a subject a lot of people like to talk about. Speed test requirements to create a speed test challenge are very specific, a lot of detail. The website URL you see in the first blue box, that is the KOBD Take a Speed Test website. That information goes directly into various systems that we can use to potentially create speed test challenges. You must perform a speed test on 3 different days. So it's not just one and go. Okay, you got to do it on 3 separate days at a minimum. Otherwise, we can't file a speed test challenge. You can't file a speed test challenge. I should correct myself. There'll be data captured. It'll be time of day. It'll be day stamped. It'll pick up your IP address. We're required to submit name and address within this process, but those are as confidential personal information and will never be reflected to the public. It's protected data. And so KOBD will be opening that speed test window 3 days, and I'm sure Morgan will be giving notice out to all the folks that says, hey, the window's open, come do your speed test. So that's what we're trying to do. There's actually 2 pieces to speed test. We're right now doing speed tests for those pre-modification processes I talked about in the beginning, where we get, we address previous grants, we address DSL, we address all of those things. Part of that is speed tests. And then during the challenge process and just prior, those speed tests would actually you could create speed test challenges from those three different day speed tests. Very specific requirements. There'll be great guidance coming out, instructions. It's very, very specific. Any questions on speed tests? We sometimes get a lot of questions on speed tests.
I think we might just want to pause for a second and talk about the fact that there are really kind of 2 sets of, actually we'll say 3 sets of speed tests, because some of you have been very gracious in doing speed tests before now. And while we're using all of those and doing bead planning, we're not allowed to use them as part of the challenge process. So what you'll see is a letter from Morgan and a posting on the KOBD website that says, starting on this day, we're going to capture what we call pre-challenge speed test modifications. And so for 30 days, we will run the speed test like Bob just talked about that have much more stringent guidelines. So the old speed tests that you took, you could do one and we captured them all individually. In this case, you'll have to do them on 3 different days before they register as a speed test that we can use. And I'm using my hands like you can see me, but I have my camera off, I realize. And so, well, for 30 days, you'll come in, you'll do those speed tests. You're welcome to do as many as you want, but you must do at least 3. There's actually a time of day restriction on it as well. You need to do it from 7 to 11 p.m. at night. And what we're striving for there is to see when the network is at its busiest, when most families or kids and everybody are at home using the network, you want to make sure you're getting performance at the highest peak usage time. And then from that, you'll be captured as a test that'll say, okay, John Smith came in on this day. He took this test from this address, from this IP information. He got these results, and then that will all be recorded. When you come in the second time, it'll say he came in for test 2 of 3. When you come in for the third time, it'll say he came in for 3 of 3. We now have an eligible speed test challenge, and that will be recorded. And then at the end of that 30-day, all of those speed tests will be captured. And those that qualified for meeting all the criteria required here that we just talked about will be gathered up. They will be looked at in the location database that we have that we referred to at the very beginning. This is all the places we can fund or not fund. And then the tests that passed will be reclassified, and the providers who had locations reclassified will be notified, and that starts the challenge of that address, if you will. So your role as an eligible entity is to come in and do speed tests at locations that you're concerned about, where you think you may be not getting the service that you're either paying for or is being advertised. Our role is to watch that happen, record the information, take it, gather it, and then report it into the process so we can accurately reflect that address information, and then to let the providers know so they have a chance to rebut that speed test. So this all happens before the challenge process even starts. That's why it's called a pre-challenge modification, because it's your opportunity to conduct really aggressive speed tests before we begin. And then you can also come in and file your own challenge during the regular process. This is your chance to get it done early and to get those locations adjusted on an aggressive stance. I don't know if that helped or hurt, but it is a confusing process. So if you had questions, we would not be surprised.
I'll throw a question in here. I'm trying to understand the difference between, going to the FCC broadband map and having a challenge there. And as we're talking with those citizens, I want to make sure that I understand that challenge goes to the FCC. The challenges you're talking about here are going to go to the state, correct?
Yes, and that's an excellent question. Thank you for that. We probably should have pointed that out. If you go to the FCC to challenge the address, you're trying to prove the existence of that address as a serviceable location. And so we have a list of serviceable locations, and you're challenging, are they getting the service that they're advertised at? But if you go to the FCC site, let's say that you log in to take a speed test, you put your address in and it doesn't come up. That would tell us that that address is not captured by the FCC. And what you would be told in that test on the screen is, we don't have that address. You need to go to this FCC website and you need to file a challenge there. And in that case, you're trying to establish the presence of that address as something that is even a broadband serviceable location. So that's outside of the BEAD process. It's outside of this challenge process, but it's the perfect way that's been ongoing for about the last 18 months for you to register that your address is not recognized. So if you get that message, that's when you switch over to the FCC. Did that help, or do we need to talk about that some more?
That helped quite a bit. I think there's still the option in there of challenging the service level as well. So how do you see that fitting with this set of challenges? When
you challenge the service level, you're either challenging that maybe on your bill it says that you should be getting 1 gig service, but you know that when you test yourself, when you do speed tests at home, you see that you're only getting maybe let's say you're getting 100/20 service. You can actually challenge that you're not being served according to what you think you should be. But I just want a fair warning here that the BEAD guideline is you have to have at least 100/20 service for the location to be BEAD eligible. So a service level challenge here means I'm not getting at least 100/20. If you're not getting the service that you're paying for, that's a different issue that needs to be taken up, and we can talk about that too if you want. But in this location, in this test, we're really trying to say, are you getting 100/20 megabit up, down, and upload, so that you don't need BEAD funding. And if you test consistently under that level, then you're going to challenge service level. We're going to capture that. We're going to send it to the provider and say, hey, it looks like you're advertising that you've got 1 gig service there, but you don't. Now we need to know, is it less than 100/20? And if so, we need to make that BEAD eligible. If it's just slightly under 1 gig, it has to be what the NTIA calls substantially under, which you could think about as about an 80% service level. So if it comes back that you're getting, 800/80, that's not going to be BEAD eligible. So it has to be something that is markedly different. But the goal is 100/20 is the minimum speed that's considered acceptable. Anything below that substantially, then we look at it and say maybe there should be funding there. And that's why these have to be reviewed by KOBD individually, because it's not so cut and dry when you're doing that test or you're doing that challenge that everyone clearly understood what the question was or clearly understand what the requirements are. And that's why every single one of them are individually reviewed at the end.
Hey, just one point before we go on. If the person taking the speed test is not subscribed to 100/20 service or faster, the speed test is automatically invalid. So if you've got a 25/3 connection at your home, you got a 10/1 connection, you got a 50/5 connection, we're not testing to determine, are you getting speeds at those service levels? What we're really doing, as Deb pointed out, is saying, can you get 100/20? In order to do that, you have to be subscribed to a broadband service plan at that speed level or greater.
And thanks, Bob. That's great clarification. Because we do have people that subscribe to slower plans and then they want to test at a higher level, and that would be thrown out. So if you're paying for that service and you're not getting it, and you can prove that with a speed test, then your location would be reviewed and considered. And Morgan sent a good point out that if we say that a location is not BEAD eligible, it doesn't mean that you're not eligible for service. It doesn't mean anything like that. It just means that that particular location could not receive BEAD funding in the subgrantee process. So when we made an award to do infrastructure build out, that location would not be included because it's already at speed. And so we're not going to spend more money on it because we have, precious funds to spend. And the goal is to make sure that every location has at least 100/20. And so you should not see a lot of overbuilding going on. You shouldn't see people getting super fast speeds when they've already got adequate speed. This is really about making sure that everybody has an effective speed of 100/20. So we've probably talked way too much about that and confused you even more. So if we have, feel free to jump in with other questions of clarity and we'll be happy to answer them.
One other question that comes up is, when should people start doing the speed tests?
Morgan will send a notice out at least 3 calendar days before the test start. Again, it has to be a very specific window that says we did it for 30 days and we captured during that period under these guidelines. We hope to start that speed test window perhaps late next week or early the following week. It will be very soon. So Morgan will be putting email notice out to everyone that's on this call and all of her distribution lists. It'll be on the KOBD website. You'll see a public announcement about it. I mean, we are going to plaster the airwaves and all of the notices to let people know that the speed test window is open. And that's when it'll be ready to capture it for 30 days. Do we want to move on, or are there other questions? There's no bad questions, so please don't feel bad about jumping in and asking for clarity, because we covered a lot of ground in a lot of different ways and we tend to use terminology that's not everyday language for everybody. So if we catch us talking in acronyms or using terms that don't make sense, feel free to ask for clarity there too, because we do tend to talk in a lingo that is unique to the broadband world sometimes.
So so we're going to go through a couple different of the just a couple of these challenge categories, or what we call challenge types. Availability. Bottom line says, I can't get any broadband where I live or where I work. Okay. So we would argue that you have to provide certain types of evidence that says, I requested service. Again, I'm going to pick on AT&T just because I did it earlier today. I requested service from AT&T. They responded back to me via email that this service is not available at your location. That email, that letter, that message is evidence. Okay. If you've been denied service because you live in an extremely rural area and they want to charge you thousands of dollars to run the equipment, what we call a drop, off the telephone pole, out of the conduit, down your driveway to your home, and they want to charge you a couple $1,000s for it, That's another issue. They could not, or they say you're just too far out. You're too far out from my network. I can't serve you. Any of that kind of written documentation is evidence for what we call an availability challenge that says service is not available and this is what I've got. Again, there's specific guidelines and those will all be published and we can answer lots of questions. One of the ones that Bud has in the yellow box there is, I reserved broadband access to that location within the last 180 days. So, and that has to be something from the service provider to the person, the individual that's doing this, the availability challenge, to be input into the system by the folks on this call. Go ahead and flip, Morgan, if you would, please.
Hey, wait, before you move on, I'm sorry, I was muted. There's a point there that we haven't made yet and we need to make is, you're on this call because you are part of the eligible entity organizations that we listed earlier. These tests can be done by individuals and they can say, hey, I'm not getting service, but those individuals cannot come into the challenge process. The only people who can file a challenge are eligible entities, the ones that we defined earlier that Joshua went through. And so you may have folks that are either constituents of yours, clients of yours, community members of yours that are taking these tests. And you may want to gather up those challenges for them to put into the challenge process once it starts. And so that information is something that's the reason why we need to go through this with so many different organizations, because you have to be an eligible entity in order to come into the challenge process. So that data would be provided. It would then be captured, but only an eligible entity can put it in. So this is where, your role comes in to help reach out to your community and find out who's having issues that they'd like you to represent them on. You don't have any obligation in that. There's no cost for you to do that. It's just, you're just acting as a voice for them in this process so that we can gather things together from folks that are qualified to enter challenges by NTIA standards.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Deb. Okay. Examples of pre-challenge mods. These are the things that we remove or add locations based on information that KOBD already has. These are speed tests that are done within 60 days of opening this challenge process. It's telco DSL. It is the stuff we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. Has this area already received another grant? And if it has, we can't allow double dipping of those federal funds out of the BEAD program. So all of that stuff all put together, which ends up publishing the list of locations and the map that are eligible, is what constituents, subscribers, eligible entities are going to challenge. So this is work that's done before the public, if you will, ever sees the map. Go ahead, Morgan. Oh, sorry. Boots, get down. Sorry about the cat, guys. It's that time of day for him. What do you got next on the slide list?
We're not seeing the slide advance, Morgan.
We've decided that your cat is an honorary KOBD member.
I tell you, I can do clockwork on him between 4 and 5 o'clock every day. He's like, Dad, it's time to play. He's like clockwork.
Boots on the ground, right?
Literally.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Okay. Technology that qualifies as underserved. So DSL and other technologies, satellite, unlicensed wireless spectrum. I'm trying to think of the list in my brain. There's other technologies that will be excluded from providing broadband. So if you have satellite service, that will not disqualify that location from BEAD funding unless you have some other provider that has 120 megabits available to you. One of the technologies we're taking out is DSL. So all the old copper telco DSL on those 4 little wires that come into your house. Even if the provider says they're served, we're going to change the classification to underserved. And then if the provider wants to come in on a rebuttal or on challenge and say, no, 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 KOBD, I can provide 100 over 20 over DSL, then that follows the same challenge process that we just talked about going into the portal for 30 days. Go ahead, Morgan. Speeds, we've kind of beat the heck out of the speed stuff.
Yeah. I think we
Yeah.
covered that.
Yeah, we kind of covered this one. So, but yeah, rigorous speed test. If you look at that third line in the upper box, rigorous, 3 speed tests, specific portions of the day, must be subscribed to 120 megabit service or greater. That's what rigorous means, or all those criterias. Go ahead and flip, Morgan.
Did it flip?
We
You
have
have me a
latency.
little nervous.
We have latency delay.
This is what latency looks like in real life. That's right.
I can
Did it
share
go?
one if you want. Nope.
Let me stop and restart real quick, and then I'll turn my camera off and see if that's helpful.
Oh, right there. Okay. Did speed. So there's 3 slides left, Morgan. The next one starts. What happens after we do all this stuff? What happens after the challenge process? So after we gather all the challenges, challenge evidence, after we gather all of the rebuttal information, KOBD sits down, evaluates every one of those. So, there's over 1 million addresses, well over 1 million addresses in Kansas. So even if 10% of these get challenged in some way, shape, or form, you're talking a pretty large 6-figure number. And we have to address each one of those, not as a group. We don't look at all availability and say, here's the answer for all availability challenges and rebuttals. We have to look at each one individually and make a final determination. Once we do that, we have to send all of that information off to the NTIA. So that's what happens after the challenge process is done. And they will then approve our process as being fair and transparent and all of those things. And we'll make a determination, hopefully, that says, thank you, Kansas Broadband Office. You have done a fantastic job. We approve your list to go to what we call sub-grantee selection, where we'll post a list and then ISPs, local government, non-for-profit can come in and say, I want an infrastructure grant to serve these areas that have made it, or these locations, these addresses and group of addresses that came out of the back end of the challenge process.
It looks like Melinda has her hand up.
Sorry, Morgan, that was an accident.
Oh, that's okay.
Hey, I'll add though before Bob moves on that once the challenge process is over and we've done the summary and KOBD has sent the results to NTIA and NTIA has responded, as we move into the sub-grantee process, there will be more webinars to talk through all those. So, we don't have to cover all that today because this is a pretty complicated step-by-step process. So you can expect more webinars to follow that kind of explain where we are in the process and what's next. But the sub-grantee process will be a big one because that's where the money comes in and people are super interested, obviously. And so if you have questions, we're happy to answer them today for what we know so far. But you can expect more enlightening conversations like this that aren't actually as complicated as this one. This is by far the most complicated piece of the whole process.
And if you want to see what that sub-grantee selection process, as well as labor requirements and all kinds of policy information. That is in what's called Volume 2, which will be going to public comment that the folks on this call can comment on. I believe it's going today or tomorrow or something.
It's open
going-
today.
It's open
Yeah.
today. So if
And
you're
it's on the-
interested, sorry.
No, that's okay. It's on the link. The volume 2 is linked on the broadband website I dropped in the chat earlier. So
Okay.
yes.
Thank you, Morgan. So if you want more information or maybe just want some good reading material to go to bed tonight, that would be where you would see some of that information. And again, there'll be webinars, there'll be there'll be program guidelines and all kinds of things published after we get through the challenge process and we get all those things we came up with on policy approved. Then we'll be jumping into the how are we going to get rid of this money and make sure there's universal service across the state of Kansas. You want to go ahead and go on to the next slide? Okay, what can you do right now? Do you want me to take this or someone else want to take it? Okay, first of all.
I'll take it. I'll
Okay.
take it, Bob.
Cool, Joshua. Thank you, sir.
Yep, no problem. All right, so what can you do? So, you know, we thank you for your time today, but just a few things that you can help us out with. First, help spread the word. You know, you are most connected to your, you know, the people living in your area and your community members. And so you're going to have more access than we do. So if you can encourage them to go take speed tests at broadbandks.com, that will help us do our job and it will help you make sure that you're adequately served in your community. Secondly, read more on the challenge process. If you're up for it, there's quite a bit of reading. And so, you know, if you want more detail, please you can go use that as a resource or feel free to reach out as needed. Thirdly, you know, identify the entity and contact who will submit challenges or rebuttals for you or your organization. You know, I think it'll be helpful in the long run if you identify that person now and help make sure they get trained up and familiar. It will make the process go a lot smoother. Next, you can pre-register on the challenge portal. You know, again, this goes back to there's going to be a lot of administrative submissions that you're going to need to be doing. And so if you can kind of front load a lot of that pre-registering and then focus on the challenges, that's going to save you a lot of time and help reduce errors. And then also we will be having future webinars on this topic. So we'll have one 30 days prior to portal opening. So again, we're not going to leave you high and dry. We're going to stay in touch and keep on the education train. So next slide. All right. Again, thank you for taking the time to meet with us today. We all know you're very busy, and so we hope this was a productive meeting. Again, there was a lot of detail, and so you know, take some time to digest, and then feel free to, like I said, shoot us any questions you might have. And again, we thank you for your time. And then I think, was there any more questions in the chat, Morgan?
It is not, but I see
right.
Jade. Jade, do you have some final words?
No, I just wanted to thank everyone for their time. You're probably like, I don't understand about 50% of that. And that, you know, means you're right along there with everyone else. So again, more information will be coming, more direction. And we're always available on the technical assistance side on this or anything else that you need. So don't get overwhelmed and choose not to participate. Just reach out and we will provide a customized level of help to your community. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Unless there's no more questions, comments, or concerns, I think we can go and wrap up the call. So again, thank you all for your time and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.